I got this mother-in-law of the century, could be the worst. She wants to sue me. Well, first of all, you guys need to realize she's a gold digger. She didn't get part of the inheritance, but I'll get into that in a second. So she's coming after me, telling me that she wants this lavish party. Well, I'm not going to be a part of it, and she can go and play her little games. She's not going to get away with suing me. I know I just brought you guys into an absolute mess, but hey, Hey guys, I've read a lot of people's horrible accounts here, but I never thought that I would be writing one myself. But I don't have any other option right now, so I might as well share what's bothering me. So, I've had problems with my mother-in-law even before I met my hubby. She was my science teacher when I was younger, I know, right? And since then, I've disliked her incredibly. She was one of those teachers who did not care if you were 0.0001% of a passing grade. And like me, many people went through that horrible experience. But as fate is so playful, I fell in love with her son years later, without knowing their relationship, and I met Ian casually as a get-together amongst friends. We started dating. He had an apartment in the city, so I invited him to stay with me for a few months, and the rest was history. As we moved on, we were talking about advancing levels, and he met my parents, and all good with that. But when I met his, what was my surprise to find Mr. Woods in front of me? I guess my face wasn't the best, and I admit, but at least I was able to resist that afternoon. She didn't even remember me, so at one point in the conversation the subject came up. When she remembered, she started insisting that I was a bad student, as if hundreds of students hadn't passed through her classroom in all of our years apart. She wanted to make me look bad in front of Ian. But we've been together for a while at that point, so I didn't worry so much. Still, the rest of the afternoon was a bit awkward because I would try to correct her, but she would just insist that I was a bad student, even though I was one of the best in the classroom. At least most of the time. However, this story is about Mr. Woods, Ian's father, and Mrs. Woods' husband. He was entirely another story, and I knew that we would all get along better with one side of our in-laws, but this case was so extreme. He was the complete opposite of his wife. Affectionate, cheerful, kind, attentive, you name it. And the ironic thing is that he was like that with everyone but his wife. Miss Woods treated everyone like a kick, but not her husband. She was devoted to him, straight up, but he would get upset precisely because of the attitude that she had with other people. Sometimes they would argue, and it was more of a scolding towards her. So then everything would end in peace, and we would go on with our lives. We did spend a good amount of time living together, and there were times when we even stayed at Ian's parents' house for one reason or the other. Then, when things got a little more serious between the two of us, we started talking about wedding plans, and his father loved the idea. His mother, not so much. But it's not like they could change our minds, and then it happened. And that's how we started our adventure. Her parents weren't such a huge aspect of our lives. But that's when tragedy struck in the form of death. Mr. Woods, that nice old man whom everybody loved, passed away a week ago due to respiratory arrest. And it was fulminant. Enough to take him away without any pain. He left behind a fine boy for a son and 35 years of marriage, along with an estate that, well, that's why I'm even writing this. See, upon reading the will, there were some pretty interesting things to see, such as a small fortune he left to Ian and me. It turns out that he had made a prenup with his wife where they would have each other their own separate assets and accounts. You know, these were just different times, we were told, and you had to protect your assets, and what ended up happening is that Mr. Woods dedicated his last years to managing several businesses. We already knew that, but we didn't really know the magnitude of profits that he would generate, and oh my gosh, I mean, he was always very humble, so he didn't give off that old millionaire vibe. You know, I'm not saying it was millions, but it's not far off. He left some of the furniture in the house to some nephews, and, well, done. That was it. There wasn't a mention of Mrs. Woods, and when it was all over, she was silent, as if she was expecting me to continue in a second part, but no, just silence. It was Ian who asked if anything had been left for his mom, but no, nothing. That felt very sad, even for our taste. It was then that the discomfort began. For Miss Woods, who would always now remember her husband not with sadness but with a little hatred. And the worst part was that almost all of that dislike would be redirected at me. She began to raise her voice, with Ian and the lawyer telling her that her not being mentioned must be a mistake because her husband could not leave her out and all the rest of it. But when she calmed down, the crying started and she started pointing fingers at me saying it was all my fault because she knew that I didn't like her. And that's why I turned her husband against her. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth because Mr. Woods treated me like his own daughter from the very first moment. While for her, I was always messy, absent-minded, and remembered of my old school days. Irresponsible. I cried a lot, and that's why Ian also stepped in. You know, he told her a lot of things until she was the one who ended up crying. I didn't want any of this, but I admit that at one point it felt good that she got what she deserved. Maybe Mr. Woods knew that she was going to be like that, which justified leaving her out of the will. In the end, she went her way, and we didn't hear from her until 2 days later. I would like to know your opinion because in theory it's not my fault, nor is it Ian's that nothing was left to her in the will. I've tried to talk to Mrs. Woods about it, but she doesn't want to understand anything. And for the record, I've made an effort to reach out to her, but she's too reclusive. Not even Ian, who's her own son, has been able to be there for her. We told some of the neighbors in case they could do us a favor or even our relatives, but she seemed very evasive with everyone. She wasn't the most social butterfly anyways, but much less so now. What we've learned is that whenever she is asked about us, she doesn't say very nice things. See, for example, a neighbor who, well, in itself is a bit odd for her to be talking to any of the neighbors since they all hate each other, but they told us that at the vegetable stand she talked to Mrs. Woods, and she wasn't very animated when talking about us. She said that we were scoundrels for having connived against her and having sweetened Mr. Woods' mind. Of course, not many people even believe the story because of the kind of person that she is. It's comical because she's the only one who does believe what she says, but hey, now comes the hard time. Because yeah, Mr. Woods left us that fortune, but not only that, we inherited all the business that he managed. There are several, and that we will demand a lot from us. I think I thought I heard Ian ask his mother if she could just help us a little bit with the business management thing, but she told him no. She was rather glad that we were going to be able to do that. She was rather glad that we had all the weight on our shoulders, and I'm looking forward to at least bragging to her that we have a nice income coming in, because I assume she'll just live on her retirement anyways, or she may opt to go back to teaching, I don't know. Ian and I won't leave her aside, as she is his mom, but still, after all these attitudes, it doesn't provoke helping her in the least. I'll wait to see how the matter continues in a while. What surprises me the most is how the money issues have become the central focus of everything, instead of the loss of Mr. Woods, which is something that objectively should make us all sad. But I guess everyone grieves as they see fit. And I've even thought that this issue is just a defense mechanism for my mother-in-law to avoid feeling grief. It's sad, but it's still unjustified. I don't know what to do about this whole thing anymore. I mean, I really don't. Not with all the pressure of the new business and the whole drama from Mrs. Woods. It's just not helping. So I need some advice as to what should I do about the whole thing. Update number 1. It'll sound a little strange on my part, but things have changed for the better in our family. I know that the last time when I started telling you my story, 3 months ago, I sounded like a discouraged and apathetic, but that was a normal under the conditions we were in. However, now things have changed from our previous status quo. Despite my father-in-law's passing, the family has remained closer than ever, and we have become much more involved with each other's activities. Right after the funeral, as I got to know many of my husband's family members, we're now starting to frequent them much more, having gone out to the mountains with several of them. But the one who undoubtedly takes the prize for the most radical change all is my mother-in-law. She's changed in such a strange way that it's like seeing two different people. Just a few months ago, she was a grumpy old woman who took it upon herself to be the lead in the neighborhood. Kid stories about how a witch lived down the street and used to eat kids for lunch. Now, on the contrary, she's more cheerful and more sociable. The other day, some neighbors with whom she has a super hypocritical relationship passed by and not only greeted each other but arranged to go out for coffee at one of the most popular coffee shops in town. Seeing my mother-in-law doing that kind of thing was almost unthinkable, But now things are different, and I don't like the idea of thinking that my mother-in-law is like that now precisely because of her husband's death, and that he was the one preventing her from spreading her wings. I don't believe it. But it's hard to believe this evolution as well, and she is particularly friendly with me. Since the funeral, she's been very close to me, chit-chatting, throwing stories at me about her past and her son, and even asking me for help with some projects around the house. It even made me feel less bad that she's in that house all alone. I don't know, I just feel terrible for it. I've changed too. Me feeling sorry for my mother-in-law with the same lady who told me a few days before my wedding that I wasn't going to be the best thing for her son. It seems surreal to me, but it is well known that people after events as powerful as the loss of a loved one can change in notoriously big ways. I think the biggest aspect of my relationship with her is that we talk on the phone more often now, and she's sending me a lot of mommy pics. You know, those "have a good morning and the Lord's grace be with you" images and things like that. It used to be Mr. Woods who did it, but it was a way of saying that he passed the legacy on to the one person he thought was ideal for the job, even though he didn't expect it. As for my husband, well, it's affected him quite a bit. Contrary to usual, he had a very good relationship with his father. He was almost his best friend, and seeing him go now has made just him feel more subdued and distant. His mother and I have tried to cheer him up, but there's not much that we can do about it. He's fighting his own fight, and we have to respect that. But I wouldn't want to see him just spiral into a bad mood. I'm not going to allow it. Other than that, our life has been better. Job-wise, we're doing well. Money-wise, better than ever. And family-wise, well, I have to admit that losing my father-in-law made us value our time together. Like, as unexpected as the change in mother-in-law's behavior is, I feel it's all good. I would like that to be the lesson behind my writing. I hope you're all well with your families at home, because hug them. Just do it for me. Update number 2. My mother-in-law's getting married, and if you guys are confused, you're not alone. It's been like 5 months since the last update, but due to the zero phones, zero computer, zero internet policy we decided to implement on our vacation, here we are. You know, we planned our long overdue vacation to the beach, and we're looking forward to getting a tan and eating good Mediterranean food. We had a wonderful time and spent a whole week at the beach house we rented. Although everything was fun, it wasn't until the end of the trip. On the last night before we left the next morning, my mother-in-law commented that she was dating someone, and that things have progressed to the point where she was considering getting married. I mean, it's not official, but she says it won't be long before they ask her hand in marriage, and we were all shocked, especially Ian, who wasn't very excited about the idea. The truth is that for some time now, my mother-in-law had been dating on her own, and since we had not been in close contact with her, we weren't aware of all the changes that were happening in her life. When she gave us details of the person, that's when we needed more beers to believe it. He's younger than her, way younger. But it's funny how she's willing to go through with it despite everything about Mr. Woods' will. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that it's impossible to make your life over from scratch, and that I can't date someone young, but to me it's still like Mr. Woods' deal happened yesterday. If I were here in mother-in-law's position, I would spend at least a decade mourning Ian, and then if my heart has been able to heal enough, I would remotely entertain the idea of being able to date again. If by then I don't manage to be able to clone Ian to be with him again, because I'm not doing being the fan of dating. I met Ian and decided to stay there as long as the body can take it. She told me more about the man whom we will meet very soon. He's young, has a modest job on the outskirts of the city, and she tells me that she was his niece's teacher a few years ago. So it's again a quirk of fate that they met, and as with Ian and me. She seemed very excited, and I talked to Ian about it and told him that if they were going to get married or something, we should be present at everything. He still can't accept the idea of another man with his mother, and I don't think I would ever see him being jealous. Listening to my mother-in-law, I realized something sad. We don't always take into account romances between older people. I feel that if they're comfortable and see that they can last too long, why not just let them be happy? She and I have become close, and I'm sort of in a neutral zone between her and Ian. This whole thing of running his father's business takes quite a bit out of our overtime. It was easy for my father-in-law because he was retired and has lots of free time, but we still have our old jobs. And even between the two of us, it's almost impossible. I can't imagine when we have children. We haven't talked about Mr. Woods again, except when the subject of the supposed wedding is brought up, which my mother-in-law is taking for granted. That is perhaps the only time it's brought up again, because otherwise we have been able to turn the page. And I'm glad that we did, since not everything bad has to last forever. I'm excited to meet my mother-in-law's suitor and see what he's like as a future husband candidate. I don't mind so much anymore the fact that they're together with such recent losses. I think that they've shown me that if we only have one life, we should take those leaps of faith before we end it all and repent on our deathbed. I'll let you guys know how the meeting with her lover goes. Update number 3. Hey, it's been a few months since my last update, and bad news. We already met the guy my mother-in-law's been dating, and it was months ago. I think a day or two after my last update. Anyways, we liked him. And although it took a while before Ian got used to the idea, in the end my mother-in-law's partner convinced us to understand that he really had feelings for Mrs. Woods, and that he wasn't some kind of con artist who marries the old lady just to get the inheritance. Because, remember, we have the inheritance anyways. Their relationship became part of our life. I don't even want to imagine Ian's mind, and because, to him, it's like mocking his father. But she's just a person wanting to get back to her life, and maybe that euphoria she had was just caused by the typical period of falling in love in any relationship. When the wedding was announced, something peculiar was also announced. Ian and I were going to pay for everything. That was during Thanksgiving dinner while we were away at one of the family's homes several hours away from the city. My mother-in-law's speech was touching, but she managed to steal tears and smiles from our face when she mentioned how, quote, all of that would be possible thanks to the generous contribution of my son and his wife, whom I appreciate enormously. It was awkward, and the first thing Ian said to me was, did you tell her about paying for the wedding? I didn't want to form a fight with him at that point, as he knows the good news relationship I have with his mom. So it wouldn't be so far-fetched to believe. However, I did comment to him that at no time had I offered to pay for everything in the wedding, as she was saying. That would ruin a lot of the business that we had in a short period of time. But according to her, it was going to be an unprecedented event in the family to, quote, weigh the losses that we had suffered. She had sworn that we gave our consent and support for the wedding, and I mean, we did support the idea that if she wanted to get married, let herself get married. But it's quite another thing to make us pay for everything without consultation. She got defensive and tried to turn the whole family against us. She even told her fiancé that, quote, we were a pair of phonies, and that we didn't want to be a part with even 1% of our fortune. In itself, the wedding would be more than 1% of our savings, come on. Aside from the fact that it would be an event that would leave us with nothing to recoup from. It's not like we'll wake up the next day with more money than before. And it's very difficult that since they're older, it won't be one of those weddings where they receive expensive things as gifts. Everyone already knows that the couple has their life together, so why bother? Anyways, things escalated to the point where she threatened us. If we didn't help her with the wedding, she would not only leave us out of the event, but she would be looking for a way to show the world how treacherous we are. Is she planning to slander us for a gossip she created herself? We tried to talk about it in a calm and civilized manner, but she ignored everything. Her fiancé, far from being a voice of reason, seemed to be her minion, nodding his head at everything she said, no matter how far-fetched it sounded. Ian's upset. He's always had his doubts and thoughts about the wedding, and now his mother called him selfish. It leads to unprecedented conflict in the family. Of course, everything takes place in our house because no one else in the family has found out, and they think that we're going to cover everything. But they're wrong if they think that we're going to do it. We could have helped before, but now I don't feel that we're even going to attend. I don't even know what to do at this point. Final updates. Hey, it's me again. Well, we learned the truth thanks to one of the neighbors about 2 to 3 months ago. I remember you all saying things about Mrs. Wood's grumpy behavior. Well, our neighbors were the ones who told us the truth. And although she gradually gained the sympathy of many, not all of them agreed with the woman's sudden act of redemption. And they were quite right in their suspicions. It turns out that in one of their conversations, Mrs. Woods came clean with him. I think they had a few too many drinks, confessing that the whole wedding thing was mostly so she could get a slice of her ex-husband's money. I mean, my assumptions were correct. She was indeed sad and upset about it. So one way or the other, she just wanted some extra dollars. This seemed pretty low, and at the risk of getting into major trouble, the neighbor told us the whole thing in great detail. I warn you that you're not about to read something unpetty. Yeah, it's pretty, so I asked your eternal discretion, right? So, turns out this whole crush thing with the guy, it was nothing more than a gigantic lie. She just wanted money. She knew that we weren't going to be paying her anything, so she just brought it up in the middle of the family gathering just so we would succumb to the social pressure. Yeah, but it didn't work. And when she saw the circus was falling, she ended up being offended, and she insulted and threatened us. Remember I told you that she had become too close and friendly with me? Well, it was a trap. So that she could do the wedding, and she resorted to pettiness. And since it didn't work, apparently the romance she was having with the man was fake. Yeah, that's right. That poor guy had been in love with all of her, along with the willing to marry her at the city hall in case there was no fancy wedding. He ended up being just another victim, so he had no regrets after what, well, we did to her by the way of revenge. Guys, the wedding took place. We told my mother-in-law that we would pay and arrange everything, and that she did have to worry about anything. Not at all. This was after all the times that she said that she was going to sue us and expose us as scammers for embezzling her husband's money. Well, we organized the venue, the guests, the banquet, the ceremony. It was going to be a spectacular, and it just never happened. We made her believe it was all going to happen, but it was just a ruse to get her to attend the event alone. And when she arrived, she found out that the party room was empty. No decor, no guest, no fiancé. There was only her alone, and the only thing on the table was an individual cake saying "No more lies," signed by her fiancé. According to him, it felt very satisfying after that woman ruined months of his life. According to the salon owner, she just looked like a sour face as the music played and threw the cake at the ceiling. Well, we apologized for that, but the owner did not pay much attention to it, because mother-in-law tutored his daughter, and he already knew beforehand that she was like this. So in theory, he didn't get as hurt. We haven't heard from mother-in-law in days, and she hasn't said a word about it. The only thing that she was considering suing again for the fact that we scammed her of a wedding. But since we have her husband in our plan, there's not much that she can really do about it. This was taken way too serious, and she's capable of anything, but so far, we're on guard. Maybe she has learned her lesson and was so humiliated that she didn't even feel like fighting. You know, I hope that's the case. You shouldn't be playing with love like that, and little by little we realized more and more about how Mrs. Wood's attitude towards the wife has becoming more understanding. He was the one who got to see the truth long before all of us. Well, now we're just glad that she's out of our lives for good. Now that her and her endless drama are away from us, we can actually focus on our lives and the business Mr. Woods left to us. Lastly, I would just like to thank you guys for being a constant support throughout all of this. Really, 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 says comment 1. Really, giving an old woman hope and then humiliating her like that is your idea of revenge? And you're getting satisfaction out of that? It's crazy. If you had a problem with the whole thing, you could have told your mother-in-law about it and refused to pay. But no, you had to stoop low and subject her to that humiliation. You should be ashamed of yourself. Guys, what do you think of that comment? Because a lot of people in the comment section did not agree with it. So I do want to hear your thoughts and your perspectives. Guys, if you're new, I do a story like this every day. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want more daily videos, it's super simple. Just hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys tomorrow. And of course, remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.